Hello and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks. I'm Heena Goswami, editorial consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. Today at IGPP Expert Talks, to discuss the politics of AI technology and innovation, we are joined by Professor Bhaskar Chakravorti. Professor Chakravorti is the Dean of Global Business at the Fletcher School at Tufts University and the founding executive director of Fletcher's Institute for Business in the Global Context. He is also the founder and chair of the Digital Planet Initiative at the Fletcher School, which tracks the evolution of 125 countries as they transition from traditionally to digitally intensive economies. As part of this initiative, he has launched a multi year program imagining a digital economy for all, IDEA 2030, which explores the role of data, digital technologies, artificial intelligence, and their application as catalyst for inclusive growth, development, and productivity. He's also the author of the best selling book, The Slow Pace of Fast Change, Bringing Innovations to Market in a Connected World, and the creator of the widely referenced Digital Evolution Index. His most recent book, Defeating Disinformation, co edited with Joel Trechman, examines the challenges of misinformation in the digital age. Welcome to IGPP Expert Talk, sir.
Good to see you, Heena. Thank you for having me.
So, with America's restriction on export of high performance chips for certain nations, how do you think that this will impact the global AI innovation ecosystem? Will this truly have a lasting impact? But considering that China has still managed to develop models like DeepSeek.
Yeah, so I think a couple of points on that. One is that the restrictions on high-end chip exports is essentially a legacy from the Biden administration, and it remains to be seen how much of that will be followed through in the Trump administration, because the Trump administration so far has systematically reversed, many, if not all, of the major Biden decisions. So it's we're still waiting to see, how much of a reversal there might be on that. As far as the restrictions themselves are concerned, the original motivation for those restrictions have to do with the clear concern that access to these chips will then moderate the ability of any country or any organization in their ability to develop artificial general intelligence and basically move to the frontier of what AI can do. And there is a natural concern that the more advanced these AI models get, the greater safety risks they can pose, as they could be used for national security purposes. And the biggest concern that the United States has is, of course, if these models are used for military and cyber threat purposes by antagonist countries, antagonists to the United States, and most significantly China. And then China, in collaboration with other countries, could potentially pose a threat to the US and to nations that are allied to the US. So the whole idea of the chip restrictions was to kind of say, well, let's slow down the process of progress towards artificial general intelligence and towards frontier models of AI for these other nations, so that the US can, continue to get ahead and potentially set the standards, put some guardrails around AI safety. So that is the general theory. Now, how effective might that be? It is still unclear. Of course, having access to the highest performance chips is critical for producing the highest performance AI models. But recent developments out of China in particular, as we've seen, models such as those from DeepSeek have revealed that you can actually get pretty good AI performance without access to the absolute top shelf semiconductor chips, and without access to the same level of resources and data and so on. of course, even for the deep seeks of the world, you need access to chips. So they will always need those chips. But the Chinese have figured out ways to kind of short circuit it. So as far as you know, the the chip quotas and the impact it might have on the rest of the world, as I said, I think the eventual outcome is still to be determined. But the U.S. Continues to keep staying in the lead as far as this is concerned. But of course, it's doing it at great cost.
Despite declining trust in AI, inadequate returns on AI investment, and evidence that AI can be built at a fraction of the cost, the Magnificent Seven remain undeterred and they continue to invest heavily in the AI technology. What drives their persistence and what could be the potential impact of this trend?
So the Magnificent Seven, or kind of the major tech companies in the United States, are continuing to pour an enormous amount of money into AI development, despite the fact that just earlier this year, as I noted, the Chinese have demonstrated that you can get pretty good AI performance almost on par with the best models from the US, with at the fraction of the cost. Last year, the total AI investments added up to about $230 billion. This year, those amounts, the planned amounts, far exceed $230 billion. Amazon by itself is planning to spend $100 billion. Alphabet is planning to spend $75 billion, Meta $65 billion, Microsoft $80 billion, and so on and so forth. And in fact, there is a project that OpenAI, in collaboration with SoftBank, are planning to bring together a fund of at least $500 billion, for the development of AI infrastructure. So this is an enormous amount of money that is being poured into development of the next generation of AI. And the natural question is why? Despite the fact that there could be more frugal ways of developing this. I think there are sort of three central reasons why this is happening. One is a belief that as the resources that are needed for developing AI, as the systems become more efficient in that development process, and as we need fewer semiconductor chips to power AI models, those models themselves and the AI applications, their prices are going to fall. And as their prices fall, the demand for AI will go up, and that will continue to drive the demand for semiconductor chips, demand for more money being poured into AI, and demand for cloud infrastructure and all the inputs that go into it. So all of these players, they have a vested interest in, data, cloud infrastructure, capital, the demand for all of these going up. So as they see the development of AI models becoming more efficient, they also see the demand for all these inputs going up, and they feel that they need to constantly be ready to supply that rising demand. So that is one argument, which is that they want to be prepared, and so they're spending money in kind of getting ready for that increased surge in AI. A second argument for why each of these Magnificent Seven companies are pouring money into developing AI is that they're looking at all the others and saying, well, all the others are investing in their AI infrastructure and capabilities. So if we don't invest, then we'll be left behind. And so they feel there's a competitive pressure to do so. And at the same time, each of these companies rely on others, for critical parts of the AI infrastructure. In particular, if you think of companies like Microsoft and Amazon and Google, they have cloud services businesses that are actually benefiting from the increased investment in AI. So they are, in many ways, sort of mutually reinforcing each other's businesses by continuing to pour money into it. So there is sort of a self-sealing equilibrium that all of them have got locked into and are finding it difficult to get out of that cycle. And a third reason why these companies are, continuing to make these enormous investments is that the United States government itself is now it always was a champion for American leadership in AI, but now it has become an even more of a champion for acceleration in AI innovation. And because of that, they see that they need to fall in line with the government's agenda for American leadership in AI, and they want to stay on the right side of the Trump administration and worry that if they break from it or if they show that they are lagging behind, they might be cut out of government contracts, or they might face some penalties from the Trump administration. So there are multiple reasons why they continue to stay in the race. And as a result, there's sort of a flywheel effect. The more they stay on, the more they need to stay on, and the more each company stays on this treadmill, all the other companies feel that they must do so as well, or they risk being left behind.
You argue that US AI industry risks creating a bubble due to heavy investment outpacing real returns. In contrast, AI investment in India or Europe have been relatively cautious. Does this mean India or even Europe is better positioned to avoid an AI investment bubble, or could this conservative approach ultimately cause them to lag in AI competitiveness?
Yeah, I think, for one, the AI bubble, as it were, it largely applies to the countries that are, putting an enormous amount of capital into AI development. And the other countries, primarily outside the US, China circuit, are, yeah, they are producing AI, or they're basically piggybacking off of the foundational models that have been developed in the US and some in China. But they're largely consumers rather than producers. So their part in the AI ecosystem is somewhat different from that of the United States. So yes, they are likely to escape the bubble if in case the bubble bursts and the impact of that. Um, are they likely to fall behind in terms of AI competitiveness? I think they compete in the AI ecosystem in a very different way. As I said, their role is primarily consumers rather than producers, and at least consumers of the foundational models. And where they could compete is in developing tailored applications in specific areas. So, for instance, India has a number of different application areas that are in many ways distinctive or unique to the Indian context. Multiple language applications of AI, applications of AI in a developing world agricultural context, application for AI in small and informal retail businesses, in the kinds of environments that exist in countries like India and elsewhere. And this is not going to be something that Silicon Valley or even China may necessarily be focusing on. So developing those kinds of applications could actually be the edge for countries like India. And certainly it could be the world leader in those areas. It will not be the world leader in producing the next foundational model, or even a model like that of DeepSeek, because the Chinese have put so much talent and capital, behind those kinds of initiatives, that India is likely to not be a competitor in that space. But in the applications area, applications in payment services, in educational services, in agricultural services, certainly India could take the lead.
Regarding the US AI ecosystem, should businesses, or is there a way for businesses to break free from this suboptimal Nash equilibrium they are finding themselves in?
Well, I think at some point they do need to stop and ask, why are we continuing with exactly the same formula uh, when there is clear evidence that we can actually produce a level of AI with far fewer resources. And if at least one or two of the major players rethink their formula for development, it will cause the rest of the industry to also hit the brakes, because this is an enormous amount of capital to throw against the development of artificial general intelligence. And then the natural question also that should be asked is, what's the return on all this investment? Even if we get to the very cutting edge of AI, uh, are there going to be returns that will justify the enormous sums that have been put against this? If 230 billion was spent just last year, and this current year we're going to be spending in excess of 400 billion, and then plans for several trillions more, uh, all this money, the investors are going to be looking for returns, and it's unclear that we are going to be getting those returns relatively soon. We are seeing take up of AI in several contexts, whether it's corporate context or individual usage context. But we are definitely not seeing people, willing to pay enough money to justify all these investments. So I do believe that one or two of the major players, if they were to hit the brakes and start re-examining their model, find more frugal ways to do the development and continue to stay at the edge of the curve, they would be in a better situation. And they would also cause the rest of the industry to take a more cautious approach. I don't necessarily see a reason to, go at full tilt based on, the the expectations of returns to the enormous amounts of investment. So I do believe that there's a reasonable case to be made for some of these companies to slow down. And particularly since these companies are publicly traded companies, at some point you would imagine that the markets are going to get wise and start asking, when are we going to see the returns?
Your book, Defeating Misinformation, comes at a crucial time right on the heels of the 2024 elections, where many feared that AI could tip the scales, influence voter opinion, and even trigger what is called an information apocalypse. How do you reflect on last year's election, and do you think AI did play a role in shaping narratives and fueling misinformation?
Well, there was a lot of concern going into elections in 2024, not just in the United States and India and lots of other places. It was basically the year of elections around the world. And this was also the year when AI was expected to play a significant role in shaping the narratives that spread on social media. It turned out that AI played a marginal role. Of course, there were lots of examples of deep fake videos and or deep fake audio transmissions that were representing false narratives. But I don't necessarily think AI per se, made a huge difference. Even with relatively elementary forms of manipulation, you can come up with false narratives. I think there were false narratives that were quite effectively spread in the American elections, and that played a role in shaping voter behavior. But I don't necessarily think we needed AI for that. It was done with relatively simple, human ingenuity and digital creativity.
Or through debates and speeches? I mean, that fueled disinformation.
Yeah.
To my next question, you analyze social media platforms through a microeconomic lens, highlighting the incentive structure that drive them as profit driven businesses. What key insights have emerged from this perspective, and how do these incentives shape the spread of content and misinformation?
Well, to put it very simply, I think um, the spread of both the creation and the spread of disinformation um, is something that, to some extent is protected by the First Amendment in the United States, where, the right to free speech is considered sacrosanct. And the law under Section 230 in the United States basically gives digital platforms like Meta or X the basically a get out of jail free card, because any content that is hosted by those platforms, regardless of the quality of the content, regardless of whether that content is true or false, regardless of whether the content is hate speech or incites, some kind of violence or incites bad behavior, the platform is not held responsible for that content. So with all that in mind, the platforms themselves need to see it in their interests to moderate bad content. And they know that if there is a lot of bad content on their systems, then the advertisers might move away from that content or positioning their ads next to the content. And that is the primary reason why platforms are going to be watching out for bad stuff on their systems. They may also be moving away from bad stuff on their systems if they see users moving away from the system, because if users start moving away, then advertisers also will start moving away. We've seen that in the case of X, formerly known as Twitter, when the quality of the posts on X started dropping, we saw an enormous exodus from X, and as a result, we also saw advertisers moving away from X. So commercially, X has been a disaster. So I think that's a sort of a case study in why the digital platforms themselves, as profit maximizing or profit seeking entities, have an incentive to put some guardrails around content, despite the fact that there are no laws in the United States, at least, that tell you what a platform should or should not allow on its systems. So I think profit maximization, of course, is the critical factor that will drive this. Ultimately, the platforms themselves need to have some governance systems, some ethical systems that they need to hold as part of their overarching responsibility as media companies. But I think ultimately profits trump everything else. The other factor to keep in mind is that false content, and quite often content that is titillating or content that seems like a radical departure from the standard issue message that you will see on social media, tends to get more views, get more likes, and gets to be reposted more frequently. And that is always something that is beneficial to the platform, because it generates more eyeballs, which then generates more ad revenue. So from a platform owner's perspective, any post that is surprising or titillating, and usually false information, has those characteristics, that will generally travel faster, generate more eyeballs. So commercially, it's more attractive for the platform owner. And in fact, false information travels about 6 times further and faster than accurate information. So that's another factor to keep in mind, which is disinformation is actually more profitable on average than, quote unquote, credible information.
Your book seeks to develop a global approach for mitigating the harms caused by borderless digital platforms and AI tools while simultaneously enhancing content quality and curbing material that could be harmful. What are the key challenges in defining and enforcing boundaries around harmful content?
Well, the key challenge is around, kind of moderating content. One of them is, of course, that uh, the major countries where these media companies exist have very different rules and regulations that provide or don't provide guardrails against them. So the United States, for instance, as I mentioned, holds free speech to be sacrosanct. So there are very few regulations. There are some regulations at the state levels, but at the federal level, there are no regulations. The EU has regulations, perhaps the most significant framework for moderating content. Countries like China has very strict regulations of what you can or cannot post, and certain platforms are not even allowed in China. Countries like India has rules and regulations. So every part of the world has a different set of rules and regulations, which make it challenging for a platform that is global in its operations to then keep in mind how to treat different kinds of posts in different jurisdictions. Some jurisdictions may ban it. Some jurisdictions may, ask you to put a label around it. Some jurisdictions may have no restrictions at all. So they have to be mindful of the differences across all these jurisdictions. And they can't just have a universal ban on a post, because then that would be censorship. A second challenge for the platforms are that there is just too much information on this platform. It's just too much in terms of volume and in terms of complexity for them to be able to chase every piece of information down, regardless of whether it's disinformation or credible information or something in between. Also, when there is disinformation or misinformation or hate speech, it could come in many different languages. And much of the content moderation that platforms used to do, they used to do much more of it in the past than they do now. The content moderators generally tended to be ones who were proficient in a few languages, primarily English. But there's so many different languages that are spoken around the world, and how can these content moderation teams keep up with so many different languages? And basically, platforms had not invested in multi-language content moderation. Even if they were to have proficiency in individual languages, just in a country like India, for instance, there's so many different languages that are spoken, that are used on social media. Even if the moderators were to be familiar with the language, quite often the misinformation or disinformation or toxic information is communicated in terms of colloquialism, in terms of local codes that are hard to figure out if you are sitting at a distance and trying to sort this through. So from a human content moderation perspective, this is quite a challenge. Then one could argue that maybe algorithms and machines should do this. Well, of course, algorithms are used to capture and kill certain kinds of content, but algorithms can go only so far. They search for certain keywords, they search for certain patterns, and they often cannot search for every bad word in every language. They can't search for these coded words or colloquialisms. So this is a very difficult task, and it requires much more investment, a much stronger set of regulations, and to some extent it requires actually a degree of user responsibility, and so sort of a collective approach to capturing the bad stuff. And it's very, very hard to do unless you actually have a determined system of governance, accountability, regulations, investments, and a commitment to rooting it out.
Thank you so much for joining us today. These are all the questions. Thank you for this very insightful and engaging conversation.